Uh, all right, and I'm gonna share my screen. Can everybody see? Can you somebody give me a thumbs up that you can see my screen okay? Beautiful. All right, so
Yes.
since it's perfect. So since it's 6 o'clock, I think I'm just gonna get started. I was just saying before, if anybody doesn't mind muting themselves, just so as I'm making the recording, we don't have any background noise, just in case. And then once we get into questions and everything, we can go ahead and unmute. I'm going to introduce myself first. My name is Alicia. I'm the executive director of the Salt Ponds Coalition. Um, I'm here tonight to talk about water quality in Green Hill Pond. I'm going to specifically focus on nutrient pollution and then kind of the other factors that also play into nutrients in the salt ponds. So, just for those of you who don't know us, the Salt Ponds Coalition's mission is to protect and enhance the health of the salt ponds for the benefits of not only the wildlife that lives on the pond, but also the people who enjoy the ponds. Um, and an overview of what they are, and kind of brought it back all the way to the beginning. They're coastal lagoons that were formed after the retreat of the glaciers. So millions of years ago, they were actually dug out by glaciers. That's why we have a lot of the rocks and the sediments that we do. And they provide crucial habitat and ecosystem services for this area. So anything from storm protection to water filtration, especially the marshes surrounding them. And there are great areas of biodiversity. We have a lot of different types of fish, shellfish, jellies, crabs, anything from the bigger fish that you would find out in the ocean. It's a great spawning area for things like flounder to smaller bait fish, things like mummy chugs and killifish. So it hosts a whole variety of species. And as I talk tonight, there's a lot of challenges that the ponds face. Different ponds are affected in different ways by things, but the ponds have definitely changed over time. And it's not just one thing that changes them. Pollution is one thing, but that also intersects with climate change and sea level rise, changes in habitat, storm impacts, sand moves around. Sometimes you get sandbars and sand placement where they weren't before. Invasive species are another thing. In the past few years, we've seen clinging jellies on the rise. We've seen Asian shore crabs, things like that. That changes the ecosystem. So as I talk tonight, there can be a whole host of
Are you
factors
there?
that are
Yeah.
affect what our ponds look like today. And also just to pull it back, so from us, from Salt Ponds Coalition, we monitor all 6 of the major salt ponds. Green Hill Pond is one of our ponds, but we start all the way in Winnapogue Pond and Westerly, and we go all the way to Point Judith. And drilling down on Green Hill, I'm sure everybody here knows this, but just as a little refresher, it is primarily located in South Kingstown, but about 20% of the pond is located in the town of Charlestown. So that's the Allen Cove area. It's connected to the ocean by a tidal inlet. So that's underneath the creek bridge. So unlike some of the other salt ponds, or very similar to Potter Pond, it does not have a direct breachway to the ocean. Because of this, it creates somewhat of a unique environment in that it's slightly less brackish in nature. So it's got some freshwater inputs. It's not as saline as, let's say, parts of Ninigret that are closer to the breachway. And because of this, you do have an abundance of shellfish that like to grow in less brackish water. And you also have a unique pond, submerged aquatic vegetation called widgeon grass. Um, it's a relatively small pond compared to some of the other ponds that we monitor, and it is one of the more densely developed ponds. And as most everybody here is probably well aware, shellfishing has been banned in Green Hill Pond, I think since the 1990s, and it's heavily impacted by the nutrients and bacteria. So that's what I'm going to be focusing on tonight. Just so you understand what we do, one of our biggest programs is collecting data. for the salt pond. So we began in 1985 when there was a data gap that needed to be filled, and we filled it by collecting this data in the citizen science program. The pond watchers were born. We test across all 6 of the sites. We have about 30 sites currently, as well as 3 sites on the Saugatucket. All of our data is collected by volunteers, and then it goes to URI Watershed Watch, and it has an EPA level of quality control and assurance. So all the data that I'm showing tonight, this is how we collected it. So it truly is a community and a citizen science effort. So just to give you an idea of what we test for and why, we test first and primarily for dissolved oxygen. Just like we need oxygen to breathe, so do many of the marine organisms that live in the ponds. Low oxygen conditions can be stressful, if not fatal, to the animals that live in the ponds. Tonight, I'm going to focus a lot on nutrients. The nutrient that really affects the ponds is nitrogen. The salt ponds is nitrogen. Freshwater has phosphorus, which can be harmful as well. That's not as big of a player at all in the salt ponds ecosystem. It can be harmful in that you can have too much of a good thing. You think nutrients, you think that's a great thing. But just like you can over fertilize your lawn, we can over fertilize the salt ponds, and that leads to too much plant and algal growth, which can actually consume oxygen when it dies, stressing out the marine ecosystem. And I'll talk a little bit more about that later. Bacteria, we test for 2 different types of bacteria, one that focuses more on the swimming standard, one that focuses on the shellfishing standard. We are not DEM, we're not the regulatory body. Our data is not what they use to determine closures, but they do look at our data from time to time. They do their own set of testing, and then they use our data as supplementary data to what they do. We also test for other pond health indicators, including pH, which is how acidic the water is, especially important in things like ocean acidification, temperature, salinity, how much chlorophyll A is in the water. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that tonight as well. That's an indicator of algal growth, which has a direct connection to nutrient pollution, and then water clarity as well. Before I get into data, I do want to always like to give a couple of caveats. The data we collect it every other Wednesday morning from May through October. We collect in the early morning. You can see one of our volunteers here collecting that looks like a nutrient bottle, or it might be a saline bottle. So it is truly a snapshot in time. We don't have continuous data monitoring. So what you're seeing is just one moment, one sample of water. It can be very weather dependent. So for example, bacteria results can be very different depending upon whether it was a heavy rain or no rain prior to our sampling day. And so we take note of all those factors. We take note of the weather, the tide, even if it's overcast or not, wind. All of those things can have an impact on the data that we see. So in Green Hill Pond itself, we have 5 sampling stations. The 3 that I'm going to focus on tonight are the 3 located in South Kingstown, which is Indigo Point, Teal Road, and In Pond. So if you're looking at the map, that's the site north of Gooseberry Island. The site closest to the northeastern part of the pond is Teal Road, and then In Pond, I'm only going to talk about the surface data tonight. That way it was analogous to the other 2 sites, but we do collect water from deeper at that site as well. So those are the 3 sites that I'm going to be talking about. So what does the data show? So first, I figured I would start with nutrients. And nutrient pollution is a problem in a lot of the salt ponds and Green Hill as well. The sources are primarily septic systems through groundwater. So if we have a septic system with a leach field, especially if it's not a denitrification system, groundwater will sometimes penetrate that leach field. And if it hasn't finished the processes to take the nitrogen and everything out, that will make its way to the salt ponds. And then to a lesser extent, but not to be discounted, are things like fertilizer and stormwater runoff, as well as animal waste. All of those things carry nutrients into the salt ponds. And as I was saying earlier, Nutrients, you can have too much of a good thing. It'll spur too much plant and algal growth, which leads to reductions in water quality as well as dissolved oxygen. When we have lower dissolved oxygen, it inhibits the quality of life of the animals living there. Reduced water clarity can inhibit the growth of seagrasses. And then some of you might have seen the past few years, we didn't have it, I think, as bad last year, but rust tide tends to occur in late July and into August, and that can have an impact on shellfish. So this is a snapshot of data. In pond sites, so that center of the pond is the dark blue. Teal Road is the light blue, and Indigo Point on this is the purple. This is the average nitrogen concentration per year from 24 to 2024, giving you kind of a 10-year perspective on what our data looks like. Each one of these averages represents or each one of these points represents the average of the entire season, so May through October. What you can see just looking at this, I separated the graph into 4 sections. Low, which is where you don't have a lot of nutrient production, not a lot of production, where none of the sites were in the low category. In pond fell a lot into the moderate category, so a moderate amount of nitrogen was detected. Most of the other 2 sites primarily fell in the high category. We had one anomalous year, which was 2024. So looking at that data, in pond is pretty consistently at that moderate level. So that's a good balance of productivity and nutrients in the water. Teal Road and Indigo Point, which are closer in proximity to those nutrient inputs, are exhibiting a little bit of over-enrichment. I don't have data at this time for 2025. We did take it, but it takes about a year or so to actually get our data back. So I don't know if that's a trend or an anomaly. With the exception of Indigo Point, most of the nutrient spikes, and I don't think this is going to be shocking to anybody, occurred in July and August. And just to give you a little bit of perspective, the highest spikes in 2024 at In Pond was about 1,418 micrograms per liter at In Pond. Teal Road was the highest at 3469 and Indigo Point at 1819. So if I just go back 1 second, you can see at the spikes, they might have been in the extremely high category, but over the course of the season, most of the time they end up in that kind of high but not extremely high category. So they're not running at an overabundance of nutrients for the entire year. As a corollary to this, chlorophyll A is what we use to gauge the amount of plant matter algae in the salt ponds. And while it's not a direct like one-to-one correlation, we do typically see that when we see increased nitrogen, we also see increased levels of chlorophyll A. Numbers seem to spike in the late summer. In August at Teal Road and Indigo Point, In Pond was a little bit more random. I also don't know if this might be because of the way the water flows through the pond. It's a little bit more concentrated in the coves and maybe a little bit more fluid in the pond itself. And then you can just see we had the highest In Pond, definitely even at its spike, was not near where Teal Road and Indigo Point was. And that definitely tracks with what we see in the data as well. There are a couple of years where In Pond has a higher magnitude of chlorophyll A, but it tends to really be at the sites that are closer to the water. We see a higher amount of chlorophyll in the water as well. Another corollary to this is oxygen. So as I mentioned earlier, as nitrogen increases, you get more plant growth as plants die and start to decompose. The bacteria that decompose these plants do consume oxygen. So we typically tend to expect a decrease in dissolved oxygen where we have increased nutrient production and pollution. We test for DO in the early morning. try to get it at first light. And the reason why we do this is because when DO, dissolved oxygen, should be lowest in the day. It's when organisms have been consuming oxygen all night, but you don't have the benefit of photosynthesis to put that oxygen back in the water. So we tested in theory when the pond is at its most stressed for dissolved oxygen, and that gives us an idea of what it is at its worst. Over the course of the season, we expect an inverse bell curve pattern. So basically, we expect it to start high, take a dip during the hot summer months, and then as we get back into the fall time, when it starts to get cooler, we expect dissolved oxygen to go back up. Some of this might be nutrient driven. The other thing is temperature also drives the amount of oxygen that the water absorbs. So the warmer the water is, the less oxygen saturation you have in the water. So most of the sites, as you'll see in a moment, in this area averaged from the fair to good range. So that's really good. We want to have a target of about 5 for dissolved oxygen according to the EPA standards. And as you can see, there's been a couple times where indigo point has been below or really close to that target. But for the most part, the sites really do fall in the fair or good range. So at between 6 and 8, when they're falling there, that's an area where you'd have a productive system, not a ton of stress on any of the animals. Fair, some of the animals might be stressed out, but for the most part, they will be fine. It's when you get into the poor, that's when you start to have some of your sensitive animals possibly struggling a little bit. And then hypoxia and anoxia are where you have almost next to no oxygen at all. And that's when you would have your fish kills. So it's good to note that in these areas, the oxygen levels, even at their worst, at the earliest part of the day, are still in that good range. So as I mentioned earlier, temperature can impact a variety of things, including dissolved oxygen. Temperature also can affect plant and animal preference, which I'll talk about in a little bit and give you a good example of this. But for example, the classic one is lobsters. Lobsters used to be very prevalent in this area, but as temperatures have slowly started to change, they've migrated northward to areas that are cooler. From some of the things that I've read, I'm from New Jersey, and a lot of the animals that are present here now are the animals that in my childhood would have been more present in New Jersey in the mid-Atlantic, and they're slowly making their way up the coast. Those traditional New England animals that like that colder water are starting to make up their way to Canada and Maine. I did do a 10-year trend, but it's not really going to show you much. Some of the sites with longer data sets, of which in pond is one of them, show us that pond temperature overall isn't increasing. The highest highs that we've hit before are still those high highs, but what it is showing is that typically, with probably the exception of this year, our ponds are getting warmer earlier in the season, and they're also staying warmer longer. And we do typically expect temperature, and this is not anything shocking, to exhibit a bell curve. So it'll start low when we're testing, go high, and then start to decrease. So this is the temperature of average temperature per year since 2014 of the sites. And what you see, they really fall in that 20 to 23 degree range. And once again, this is the average of the entire season. So when we start earlier in the season, it is lower, but over the course of the season, they are trending above 20 degrees Celsius. What I did was I pulled it back, and this is just in ponds data. And if you look back at 1985 to 1993, you can see that the average over the course of the season was actually lower, probably somewhere around 17 degrees. For most of those years. So when you look at it like this and you see that jump from 1993 to 2004, you can see that there actually is an incline in pond temperature. So the average temperature in October from 1985 to 1992 was 11.98 degrees. But in 2018 to 2024, so a same period of years, it was 16.57. So overall, it's essentially a 12 to a 16 jump. So that's when I say that the overall temperatures in the ponds might not be getting warmer, but it's staying warmer longer. That's what I mean, is the ponds aren't cooling as faster as we get into the fall. July temps, I pulled the highest and the lowest. The highest was actually in 2007 at 27.5 degrees. 2024 was actually a little bit cooler than that at 25.9, but the lowest, and I think this was an anomaly looking at the data, but was 17 degrees in 1985. So for the most part, it ranged over 20 degrees in July. That might have been, and I'm not sure, a cold July or a colder July. Um, but so what does all of this have to do with the ecosystem itself? Well, submerged aquatic vegetation is a great example because it is extremely susceptible to temperature changes as well as nutrient changes. Typically in the salt ponds, we have two types of seagrass. We have eelgrass and we have widgeon grass. Eelgrass is the grass that most people know and associate with the salt ponds. It's the long, stringy grass. And it's very well, it's present in all of the salt ponds except for Winnapaug. Widgeon grass, on the other hand, is present in some of the other ponds, but Green Hill is really known as being an area for widgeon grass. They're both found in shallow coastal waters. However, eelgrass prefers cooler ocean waters, whereas widgeon grass prefers warmer, lower salinity waters. So once again, that's kind of why Green Hill is the perfect ecosystem for widgeon grass. They provide a lot of benefits. Anything from sediment stabilization, and they're a habitat for fish, shellfish. You can see I have horseshoe crabs in that picture. It's not uncommon for you to find jellies in eelgrass beds, and one of my favorite animals often clinging to eelgrass beds are seahorses. You tend to find a lot of smaller animals using eelgrass beds as camouflage, and a lot of animals actually lay eggs on eelgrass beds. You'll see if you ever pull up a blade of eelgrass, sometimes you'll see tunicates or eggs or other things stuck to them. They use as an area of stabilization. However, they are extremely sensitive to temperature changes, nutrient loading, and even water clarity. So if they're not getting enough sunlight, just like the plants on my porch, unfortunately, they don't get enough sunlight, they're not going to thrive. And what we see is when we have increased algae and other things, that actually decreases the amount of water clarity, increases turbidity, and creates almost like a shadow. So this is one of the reasons why they're great, like canary in the coal mine, so to speak, for the ponds, is because they are so sensitive to temperature change. So this study was from 2023, I believe. The last data time that a survey was done of submerged aquatic vegetation was 2021. I know that they are in the process of trying to study a new survey or trying to fund a new survey. Salt Ponds has been a part of that group. They're working, we've been working with CRMC and DEM as they look for funding to do an aerial survey, and that's how they determine how many acres of seagrasses there are, and then there's some ground truthing that's done after it. But this is the latest data that we have, and all of the ponds showed a marked decrease in seagrass populations over the past 10 years. There is some speculation that some of the eelgrasses might be coming back, but right now that's just speculation. The loss does seem to be primarily eelgrass, and one of the thoughts behind that is that the ponds are starting to get a little too warm for them. But in Green Hill Pond, there used to be an observed mix of both eelgrass and widgeon grass, and as of 2023, widgeon grass was the primarily observed. So that 3 acres that was left as of 2021 was primarily widgeon grass. And the recent decline, as I mentioned, was most likely due to nutrient enrichment and then water temperature as well. Increased water temperature leads to general decline in plant health. And when you have eelgrass, which prefers cooler waters to begin with, you are going to see a decline. And as I also mentioned, nutrient pollution stimulates growth of things like phytoplankton, which decreases water clarity and then reduces the amount of light available to those grasses on the sea bottom. And you can see in this map, 2016, which Green Hill being all the way over to the right, you can see that 2016, that was a large bit of eelgrass throughout the ponds. And then as you get closer to Creek Bridge in 2016 and 2021, the hashed marks are very small. But it was the eelgrass was, according to the surveys, concentrated more toward the Charlestown side of the pond as opposed to the South Kingstown side. So the question is, well, what can we do about this? And I say we, as in we as a community. We've got the water quality monitoring for you guys. We've been doing it for a long time, but that's one of the first things that we can do. We can't know that something's in trouble if we're not continuously monitoring it. So we've been doing monitoring of the ponds for over 40 years, and I've been doing some additional stormwater sampling in the past couple months to see, at least for bacteria, what is coming into the ponds after rainstorms. As far as what you can do on your actual property, if you have a denitrification system, that's great. Just ensure that you're on a proper maintenance schedule and that it's working to its peak efficiency. If you don't have a denitrification system, that's okay too, but become an informed consumer. The reality is every septic system has an end of life, or if there's a transfer of property, or you might be making a change to your home, you might need to buy a denitrification system. So the best thing to do is start now, when you have a chance and you're not under the gun to change a system, to learn about what might work for your property. And also have your septic system regularly tested to make sure it's functioning properly, have it pumped regularly. And I know that the town typically sends out reminders about that, but just make sure that you're on a schedule. As far as property maintenance, there's other smaller things that you can do. Fertilizer has a very big impact on the amount of nutrients that go into the pond. So whatever your grasses or your plants don't absorb will eventually end up in the salt ponds. And as I mentioned before, that can cause excess algal growth and low oxygen in the ponds. One really neat thing is you can go to the URI Master Gardeners, I believe, and you can actually have your soil tested to even determine what nutrients it needs, and they can let you know what the proper ratio for fertilizer needs to be. There's also a lot of great folks, landscapers who are certified by both DEM, and the town of Charlestown has recommended certified landscapers as well that know how to work in the coastal community in a way that's least hazardous to the ponds. As you pick plants for your house, consider using natives. There's a lot of plants out there. For example, beach rose, which I know is a favorite, is actually not local to the area. So looking at some of the native plants, they're built to live here. So they're acclimatized to, when we're in a drought, not really depending on irrigation. They can resist local pests and disease without needing a lot of pest control. And the native wildlife here wants those plants to be here. The birds, that come in through the Atlantic Flyway, they're looking for certain plants that have certain berries or certain nuts that they can eat. So by actually having those natives available, it's doing more than just helping the water quality, but it's actually helping the ecosystem as a whole. Trying to keep your grass higher, about 3 inches, and then leaving clippings on the lawn increases the root zone, which gives for stronger grasses, meaning they need less water as well as less fertilizer. Pick up your pet's waste, super simple. Pet waste contains high levels of nutrients and bacteria. So cleaning up after your pet is something simple that everybody can do. and also deter geese from landing on your property. They add a lot of nutrients to the ponds. I believe I was told one time that it's 25 pounds of nitrogen per day per goose.
Mm.
So, not causing the entire problem, but if you can use shrubs that deter them from walking out onto the pond, if you are pond side, right into your yard, um, they are less likely to go there because they are worried about predators hiding in those shrubs. Um, so, Another thing that is a kind of recent development, but Salt Ponds Coalition, in conjunction with the University of Rhode Island, the town of Charlestown, Save the Bay, and the Tamaqua Museum, created a program called Salt Pond Smart, and I have the QR code here up on the screen. And the purpose of the program is to an even deeper dive into education about how we can live in harmony next to and near the salt ponds, and then to also recognize the homeowners like you who are interested in this and actually make improvements to your property to be friendly to the salt ponds and to boost you up as paragons in your community. It is completely voluntary. If you start it, it doesn't necessarily mean you have to finish it, but it's a great way to look at a lot of different factors, not just pollution, but they also have deep dives into septic systems, stormwater, landscaping, drinking water, and more. You can also support municipal efforts. I did both sides of the pond just in case. Charlestown has a few initiatives. They have some stormwater mitigation efforts that they've done in Allen's Cove. They'll be doing them in waves, but they try to get funding for OWTS, so your septic system treatment upgrade. So if you live in Charlestown and you have an older system, when the money is available, you can work with the town to see if there's any way to subsidize upgrading your septic system. And they have a lot of great resources. And they also have been implementing some rain gardens and coastal plantings throughout the watershed. South Kingstown has implemented some strategically placed stormwater attenuation devices throughout the South Kingstown side, and those are meant to help filter the water of nutrients as well as bacteria. So what are we trying to achieve all in all? A healthy pond. First and foremost, we want a thriving ecosystem. We want a healthy place for people to swim, to fish, to shellfish. And I'm always thinking about the generationality of the pond. So many people that I meet that live around here, their grandparents lived on the ponds, or, they grew up here with their family and now they've brought their family here for their kids, their grandkids. So it really truly is a place of legacy for future generations as well. And I always like to say that, um, we're probably not going to go back to the Green Hill Pond of, 1980. It's probably never going to look like too much has changed in the ecosystem. But what I think is important is finding what it means to be healthy now and what our new normal will be despite all the changes to the environment. But we know pulling some of these nutrients out of the salt ponds and preventing them from going in the first place is really a start to a healthier salt pond. And then I always have to give a plug. We do all this work and we can't get it done without the support of our members. So Salt Ponds Coalition, we have our water quality monitoring program, but that's not all we do. We do education programs like this. We've done bird walks, art programs. We have salt pond safaris, which are meant to connect kids to the ponds. We truly believe that you care of something that you understand and that you love. So education is a huge part of our mission. So if you're interested in learning more about the salt ponds in general, more about our programming, please consider joining the Salt Ponds Coalition as a member. This is my contact information. Our website is saltpondscoalition.org. That QR code at the bottom will take you right there. If you've been to the Kettle Pond Visitor Center in Charlestown, it's a U.S. Fish and Wildlife building. That's where our offices are located. So feel free to come visit me. We're there pretty much every day unless I have a program or something that I'm doing offsite. And you can always contact me. Both my email address and Salt Ponce's phone number is on the screen. So you've heard me talk for about 35 minutes now. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to leave this up for one moment and then I will stop sharing because I actually don't think I can see you guys. So actually, I'll stop sharing that for now. If you have any questions, thoughts, feel free to unmute yourself, or if you'd rather just write it in the chat, I can open the chat and answer any questions. I also have two of my board members here, Ann Mannion and Art Gans, and if I can't answer the question, Art probably can because he's a wealth of knowledge. So happy to turn it over. Oh, and I also wanted to say, I should have said this earlier, thanks to Donald Geisler for helping me to set this up, as well as Green Hill Civic Association. I know they're the Vision 2030 Pond Group, and that's what made this all possible today. So.
Question.
Sure.
Are you connected in with other groups that are very interested in keeping the estuaries alive and well and healthy? Is there the URI group, or are there some other groups out and about that work in conjunction with you and your group?
Yes. So we have a lot of kind of strategic partners at the university level. We have Save the Bay, we have University of Rhode Island, and to a lesser extent Roger Williams, but mostly University of Rhode Island, not only the Watershed Watch Lab, but we do work with different labs. Like, for example, there's a lab that's dedicated to PFAS. You have the Coastal Resource Center. They have their own studies with sea level rise, climate change. So at the university level, there's a lot of intersections there. We've worked with Save the Bay as well as some of the other watershed groups. For example, Friends of the Saugatucket, that's one of the that's the river that goes into Point Judith Pond. They have disbanded, but while they were in existence, we worked with them. There are some other local neighborhood groups that we've also worked with. For example, Nopes Island Conservation Association and Quaney. We've worked with Friends of Green Hill Pond. We've worked with different groups, or at least have good communication with them. And then, of course, we work with each of the towns on different projects. And we also work with the state, both CRMC and DEM, depending on the office, Office of Water Resources at DEM, and then some folks at CRMC as well. So yes, we definitely have connections to a lot of folks throughout the state. And we are, I should have mentioned this, we are the official designated watershed group for the Salt Ponds region. And we're designated by the state, and we're recognized by the Rhode Island Rivers Council for that designation. So that gives us standing to work with the state and to advocate on behalf of the Salt
Ponds. Next.
Any other questions? Oh, okay, so thank you, Paul, for submitting that. So Paul just sent me a message just letting me know that he lives near Flat Meadow Cove and he's lived there for 30 years. And this year he's observed no eel or widgeon grass in that area of the ponds. He mentioned that sometimes grasses are so thick that he's had to put a pump in to clear the area near his dock, and this year nothing. So that's great, actual physical on-site confirmation of kind of what we know is that we're having some problems. And we are working with DEM. They're looking to help eelgrass populations in a couple different ways. One of which is actually they're getting seed from the mid-Atlantic, which is a little hardier to warm weather, and mixing it with Rhode Island seed in the hope that they'll start to spur kind of a healthier population. But everything's experimental at this point, so hopefully that will work, but we shall see. So I got another question. Is it a goal to get the pond to a place where you can shellfish? Yes. Ultimately, the goal is to, and that's a different set of numbers that I didn't mention tonight. That is bacteria pollution. Um, I know DEM has been monitoring that and it's been getting better overall. I know that they have 12 sites that they monitor, and I think it used to be all 12 are out of compliance, and I think now only 9 are. So you are starting to see a betterment of the area as far as bacteria. That is why some of the storm attenuation devices went in South Kingstown. Some of the improvements Charlestown has made as well would affect bacteria. And that's why I've been working with a couple of interested citizens, and DEM has been very generous, and they are running samples to me at the DOH lab. So I actually went storm sampling today. So if you see a girl in a black car running out every so often and grabbing bottles, that is just me. I'm stormwater sampling and checking the bacteria after we have heavy rainstorms, which we definitely had yesterday. And that's so that we can, I'm trying to get a good host of numbers and look at it in different rain scenarios to see over that, what's working, what's not, where is the bacteria, where is it coming in from? So you'll see me running around that South Kingstown side of Green Hill, grabbing those samples. So yeah, and DEM has all that data as well as I collect it. So
Great.
Yes, John Vitalino. I have been researching the whole scenario in the Green Hill Pond area and the sources for pollution and so forth. And you said at the beginning the so-called bacteria pollution. But what about the what's happening in terms of the towns? In other words, South Kingston in particular, relative to cesspools that are overflowing or out of sync, and adding fertilizer onto the lawns and areas around the homes. Is anything you're aware of that's been focused in that area? I know that I interacted with Dennis Bowman for several years with the Friends of Green Pond and organization, and we've come up with a couple of ideas in terms of how to reduce the pollution in Green Hill Pond. Maybe not zero, but to an area where fishing is allowed, bathing, and things of that. And more recently, we've worked on the idea of dredging links to the ocean. And we've come across a link which is virtually parallel to the ocean, starting from the creek bridge to the breachway. And this was a link that was used many, many years ago. And I'm talking about in the pre-1960 timeframe, and then revisited later on and then eventually shut off. What about reinvestigating that and what impact would have? Many of the on this southern Rhode Island coast have estuaries that have been cut out and utilized as areas for cleansing and flushing the ponds. Are you aware of any efforts that are ongoing right now in terms of flushing the ponds? The whole idea of breachway, not breachways, but dredges of links that existed many, many years ago and now have been basically thrown out and not looked at at all.
So I am aware of efforts that have been looked into dredging, and I am going to admit I am not a coastal geologist. But from people that I have spoken to who are and who have a better sense, and I will turn it over to Art too, because he has more of the historical knowledge. The creek bridge has a bottom on it that cannot be dredged. It's got a wooden bottom base, according to folks at the town of Charlestown. So it's kind of as deep as it's going to get. And I know there have been studies done that even if you were to dredge, the amount of additional tidal flushing that would happen is so minimal. It really wouldn't make that much of an impact. I know with the Lynx channel, it didn't work. And Art can speak a little bit better to that. That was before my time. But it has filled in and it wants to be filled in. And it didn't help with flushing at all. My understanding, and it is more of an engineering feat that, once again, not my bailiwick, is to have somewhat what it used to be done at Trustham and what I think is done at Cards Pond to a different degree is a temporary breachway that would connect Green Hill to the ocean is actually a more viable solution if you were looking for flushing. However, it would change the ecosystem substantially. So that lower salinity that I talked about, all those things that make it a good habitat for things like widgeon grass and shellfish might get disturbed. So you would want to do a lot of studies before you just go ahead and flush out the water. There is also the fact that Green Hill Pond is below sea level. So if it's not done correctly, it can actually lead to flooding in the neighborhood.
Need to stay with her.
So it's something that, yes,
So,
you know,
she's holding her own.
engineering
She's holding her own.
theoretically is it could be done, but there are other consequences for reasons why it maybe shouldn't be done, which is why we as an organization focus on the upstream. Instead of thinking about how to get these things out of the ponds, we think about how to never have them in the ponds in the first place. There is tidal flushing of the ponds. It's slower. It happens about every 2 weeks, is my understanding, is, you know, from when a bit of water enters to when it leaves. That's about the cycle of time, which is slower than some of the other ponds. But as you mentioned, there's not a direct connection to the breachway. And I did see that there is a question just related to this. Do we expect reconstruction and dredging of the breachway to impact Green Hill Pond favorably? Kind of going on that, I mean, it will impact Green Hill Pond in that, you know, having it not stopped up would have impacted Ninigret, and by proxy would have also impacted Green Hill Pond. So by keeping it open, yes, we're maintaining that nice, strong circulation and flow throughout both of the ponds. Do I know if it'll have any true added benefit? We've dredged the ponds before. I think in the 11 years I've been at Saw Ponds, it's been dredged 3 times. So, I mean, it's a continual process to keep that water moving. Do I think it's going to have a huge impact on Green Hill? No, but had we not done anything, it would have had a huge impact on both ponds. And Art, I don't know if you want to add anything to the Lynx channel, since you're here.
Well, the link channel was actually a very narrow canal that was a vain attempt to increase anadromous fish runs that goes to Green Hill Pond. It failed. And when we started in 1985, looking at the first dredging that we did at Charleston Breachway, we found that the link channel was causing increased eutrophication over in the eastern end of Ninigret Pond. So the natural flow should be through the breachway and going east, over through Tockwatton, over through that end of the Ninigret Pond into Green Hill. And so that was what was actually the channel going all the way to the Creek Bridge was done to increase that. And the link channel actually was only temporarily opened, and it was closed up during most of the year. So the whole thing was as an absolute boondoggle to begin with. So the link channel thing is really off the table. One of the big things, and I've had a fair amount of heartburn over, was when they rebuilt the Creek Bridge. The width of that bridge was significantly larger than the original bridge was. And Coastal Resource Management Council decided to block half of that side of the bridge with wooden stop logs. And of course, it caused some flooding and everything else. And so finally, they did remove most of the wooden blockades that's over at that area. But it was again, it was a poor decision to begin with over there. So I mean, it's one of those things that's been fixed, and so that's what I got to say about the history of it.
Thank you, Art. Any other questions? Just being cognizant of time, we had about 9 more minutes or so. So I just wanted to. And also feel free, Alicia at joinsaltponds.com. You can always email me if you think of a question later on today and it's just a burning thought. Feel free to reach out to me or to give Salt Ponds a call. I'm always happy to answer questions.
I have one other question,
Yeah.
if I could. Has anyone done a feasibility study of dredging on the so-called link that goes from a breachway to a creek bridge? People have always said it's going to cost megabucks in order to do this. Other people say, oh, it's not worthwhile. I talked to, and I can't pronounce his name, Boombilolius in South Kingstown. And also one of the people associated with, I believe, the company that comes out of, I think originally out of the state of Maine, but I'm trying to think of the name, Zach Henderson, who was the technical leader and the head of the Woodward and Curran work relating to the Green Hill Pond. The other person is Richard
Richard Bourbonnais. Yeah,
who is the
he's
South Kingstown Director of Public Services. And I asked them point blank, if nitrogen and bacteria cleanup would result in an unpolluted Green Hill Pond, they said no. I would also add that Ninnis Bowman initially supported the approach of going through that link channel and opening it up, and suddenly changed his position, due most likely from other members or pressures from other groups associated with the peninsula or people living on the peninsula. Unfortunately, Dennis is moved and is no longer involved in the program. And from what I heard, he had some serious illness that prompted him to leave the area. But
John,
go ahead.
John, if you may remember, this is Dan Tonona. You may remember that we engaged Woods Hole Group to answer the question about whether dredging the link channel would improve lower the bacteria count in the Green Hill Pond, and they came back with a negative. They said it would not work, and that was after you raised that issue about the link channel, and they closed that down. So it's not only the cost, but it was the negative impact or lack of impact for the dredging of link channel was there in their opinion. That's the Woods Hole Group.
Did they justify that result or comment in terms of not having an effect with technical data?
Yes.
Did they show you that data? Because we've looked at some of the reports that have come out dealing with looking at other connections between Green Hill Pond and the Big Charleston Pond. And that clearly shows the effect is negligible. But I'm not aware of any data that's been published saying the link channel is technically not feasible.
John, I'll pass that report back on, or the opinion from Woods Hole Group to you.
I would be interested in seeing that.
Thank you, Dan. I appreciate that. Yeah, I know Dan has that report, and I just know from a practical standpoint too, just cost wise, since you mentioned it, startup costs for dredging are quite high. Um, so that's part of where the cost benefit analysis I think would come out, as well as the data supports that there wouldn't be a huge change, and the cost to even dredge is so high that it just wouldn't be. Plus, you have to get permitting and things like that. It's a lot more complicated than just putting a dredge in the water.
Thanks, Alicia.
Any other questions? If not, just want to thank everybody for coming and listening to me tonight. And I hope this was informative. And once again, feel free to contact me anytime. And I look forward to seeing you guys out in Green Hill, and have a wonderful. Oh, Anne.
Oh, I just wanted to thank Don and Dan for making tonight possible, and for everybody that took the time to be here to learn about the Salt Ponds Coalition. If you can help spread awareness amongst our community in Green Hill about what we do and the impact that we have. As Art Ganso says, if we don't test the water quality, it wouldn't be happening, and it affects our knowledge of how we can have a difference, as well as all these partnership organizations that we work with rely on our data for the initiatives that they take. And so it's very important. Alicia is on her own. We have a one full-time equivalent person running this organization, and it's Alicia, and she works tirelessly to do all the educational programs, to do events like this with the communities across all the salt ponds. We just had our Coastal Social, which is our annual fundraiser event. It happens every July, and we try to get the word out about that. So if you're interested in getting more involved or increasing your engagement beyond membership, and I hope you all do become members, coming to that Coastal Social is a great opportunity. We also have our annual meeting coming up in August. We have a keynote speaker coming from the Shark Institute of South Kingstown. It's the one night a year where we gather in person at Kettle Pond, and we deliver reports from the committees, and it's an opportunity to ask more questions. So think about coming to that. The Salt Pond Safaris are wonderful events that happen periodically throughout the summer season. Families love them. Alicia leads those down at Ninnegret Pond. People really enjoy them. We're adding bird walks, beach walks. Art's done some fabulous beach walks, canoe paddles on the ponds. We just want to keep the conversation going with the community to raise awareness on all the things that Alicia spoke about. Because again, with knowledge, we can, move things forward and improve things. And that's really what it's all about. So thank you all for being here and for your support of Green Hill Pond.
And I'll add to that again, Dan Tonona. Please consider donating to Salt Ponds Coalition. It's a wonderful organization and deserves your funding. So please consider that.
Thanks, Dan. Thank you, Anne.
Mhm.
All right. Have a good night, everybody.
Thank you, Alicia.
Thanks, Alicia.
Thanks, Alicia.
Of course.